This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
Still waiting in line? Again? That's time you'll never get back. Save time and money with Stamps.com. Over 4 million businesses have skipped the line with Stamps.com. Join them to save up to 90% off carrier rates from your computer or phone right now. Print postage for certified mail, registered mail, and packages in seconds. Then schedule a pickup right from your home or office. For a limited time, go to Stamps.com and use code PODCAST for a free welcome gift. Taxes and fees apply.
A Swift Kick in the Ass, episode 83.
All big changes start with a swift kick in the ass. Join the journey of lifelong friends, John Curren and Tom Stewart, as they make conventional thought bend over and take a boot to the keister. Warning, listeners may notice a force equal to or greater than needed to get your ass moving. A swift kick in the ass, living life on your terms.
Welcome, I'm Tom Stewart, and I'm joined with my lifelong childhood friend, John Curren. And today we're talking about working with what you have. And this all stemmed from a meme that John posted on our Facebook page. John, why don't you tell them about this crappy situation that you so pleasantly displayed?
Yeah, I mean, not to get graphic or anything, but here I am sitting on the can, and I look, doing my business, and I look over, and I notice that there's just one sheet of toilet paper sitting on the roll. And I was thinking, what the hell am I going to do now? Luckily, I had an extra backup roll right there in the bathroom, so it wasn't really that big of a deal. But I think that this applies to life in a lot of ways. You're in a crappy situation. You got to work with what you got. You got one little sheet of toilet paper and a huge mess to clean up. What do you do in those circumstances?
Oh, John, I know what to do because my father told me this when I was a little child. He thought it was funny. My mom didn't think it was so funny, but he showed me what the survival guide to if you only had one piece of toilet paper of how you wipe your butt. So what he proceeded to do is he poked his fingers through the one sheet of toilet paper, and where every finger was, he took out a little circle of toilet paper. And then he said, you wipe your, it fit kind of almost like a glove over your four fingers there. He said, you wipe your butt, and then you use the little pieces of toilet paper to clean out from underneath your fingernails. Now, as a little kid, I thought that was hilarious. My mom didn't think so. And as I look back now, it's pretty stupid. But when you brought that up, I thought of that joke that my father told me.
You sure it was a joke, Tom?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe he was being serious, but...
it's like, wash your hands later. It was kind of like the kid that we played a trick on in high school with the giving him the Mexican water.
Oh, yes. That was good times.
And guy comes running in, about 2 days after he had this big bottle of Mexican water that we gave him because we drank his purified water.
Right. Because in each of the hotel rooms, they would supply you with bottled water so you didn't get sick. Well, me and John, being the ass knuckleheads that we were, we drank his water, and we thought it would be funny to spike his with the Mexican water, which he was a jerk, so we thought that we were justified.
Yeah, we thought we were justified. Kind of regret it a little bit, maybe.
Not at all, because it's given us great stories.
Yeah, but anyhow, we were in the room, and all of a sudden there's a pounding on the door, and Tom answered the door, and it was the guy. He's like, "Get out of my way!" And it basically, I remember Tom kind of flying away from the door, being pushed away from the door, and he ran right into the bathroom, and he was there for, I don't know, an hour or so, on the toilet. But
and you forget that later on that evening we were on a balcony, and I looked down and there was a little Ziploc baggie, and inside it was some poopy drawers.
Yeah, well,
and I proceeded to toss it on the balcony that was right above us because I heard some guys out there whistling and talking through it. And all of a sudden, you did the whistling was just interrupted quickly. And you're, oh, coño, what is that? Yeah.
Well, this is really a graphic episode, isn't it? But I just remember the guy before he disposed of his poopy drawers, as he said. He turned the shower. We heard the shower running, and we're like, hey, what happened? And he's like, oh, Montezuma's revenge got me. He says, I didn't want to mess with cleaning up, so I just went into the shower. Turned the shower on myself. It wasn't even worth trying to use toilet paper. So, it's again, I think it applies to working with what you have. And sometimes even if you have a whole roll of toilet paper, it's just not worth the effort. You got to bring out the guns, the water guns, and clean up the situation. I know we're making a lot of jokes around here and kind of potty jokes about it, but I think it really does apply to life. Going back to that moment that started me off on a good financial path. Here I was, 240 grand in debt, and I was feeling depressed about it. In fact, I thought I was going to need to see a doctor to get some type of medication because I just felt I was depressed about the situation. But the more I thought about that situation, the more I thought medicine wasn't going to do anything for me. It was my taking responsibility for where we were financially and doing something about it. I was responsible for solving the problem that I created, that my wife and I created. And it was at that moment just acknowledging that, hey, you know what? You're in a crappy situation and you feel bad about it. Just acknowledging that, I think, can help you recognize that there's no other way around it but to fight your way out, to clean up the situation the best that you know how. It's not easy. It's not even pleasant really to talk about, especially, I know that when I was deep in debt, most of my friends and family really did not know. They knew that we're having some difficulties, but they did not know the extent of it because we were embarrassed and we felt bad about it. And, regardless of how you feel about a situation, that doesn't change anything for you for the better. It's not until you take responsibility, you own up to the situation, then you use whatever resources you have to help get you out of that situation, whether it's a financial situation or maybe it's a relationship. Maybe you're in a crappy relationship. So sit down with that person and talk to them and try to work things out. Take responsibility, have discussions, work towards something better. And if they're not willing to work with you towards something better, then maybe you need to go at it alone. I'm not the one who's going to make those type of decisions. I know I've made plenty of my own mistakes in the past. I just think this is something good to think about.
John, where I work in a Hispanic broadcasting company, and a lot of the guys I work with are from Cuba or, other smaller places like Dominican Republic and places that don't have a lot of resources. And these guys are very, they're like MacGyvers. They grew up in an atmosphere where they didn't have anything. And the stories that they tell me just blow me away with, some of the inventions they came up with or some of the people that they lived next to that would, come up with these contraptions and everything that you wouldn't even think of. But one of my mentors, Ernesto, who was from the Dominican Republic, I used to call him the Dominican MacGyver because he could, he went to places besides being where he was from. He grew up with limited resources, but he would go to countries, in South America, to fix transmitters and to install these antenna systems. And they had limited resources. And sometimes he would be on top of a mountain somewhere. Literally, he'd have like a little boy with a oxygen tank. And Ernesto was kind of a heavy guy. And he'd walk to the top of the mountain, get to the transmitter site, and find out he didn't have what he needed to do. In fact, the reason my old boss had even hired him originally is they were having a discussion, and Ernesto was saying, I'm stuck on this mountaintop, and I needed a certain value resistor, and I didn't have it, and there was no electronic shops, and I'm on top of a mountain. How am I going to finish this? I can't finish this installation of the transmitter. So he decided to shave the resistor itself down till it was the correct value and would actually work. So he just took his pocket knife out and he took this electronic component and started whittling away at it, to get the dielectric at a certain size that it would be the proper resistance for what he needed. And that's what got him that job and got him in that radio station. And luckily, fortunately for me, he became my mentor and taught me broadcasting. But it was guys that have that mentality that come from nothing, almost like when America first started, and we were fighting one of the most powerful countries in the world, and we survived and claimed our independence. It's having that limited resources, but using them wisely and figuring out how to leverage what you do have.
Yeah, that's the Revolutionary War. That's a great example. To whereas here, the United States was just starting out, a fledgling country, trying to claim its independence from the Queen of England, who had an amazingly large fighting force, well trained, well equipped, and outnumbered the American forces. I don't know how many to one, but it was huge, a huge difference. And so how did we win? Well, we changed our tactics. We used our understanding of the land to invoke guerrilla warfare, really, to take them by surprise. We had to fight dirty. But when you really want to win, you might not need the rules will change. And, Tom and I have discussed this before, and I don't want to go too far off tangent, but, you have to think about the rules that are in place, who created them, who do they serve? And if they don't serve you, you may want to consider maybe changing or bending some of those rules. I think that this subject too, working with what you have, again, deals with resources. And so as Tom's former mentor,
Ernesto,
he used his one of the resources he had available to him was experience and understanding of electronics, and recognizing that in order to change the resistance value of a resistor, he knew exactly what to do with that. He had knowledge and he had skills, even though he didn't have the parts available with him. But this is really a question, I think, of have versus have not. And we see this just rampant within our country. If you watch any TV at all, you'll see you'll see different groups of people who have become famous, Kardashians, about, what have they really done to earn that fame, besides having a TV show and doing a lot of stupid crap
that
no one
butts.
really wants to admit that they care about. I will be first and foremost to say I have very little knowledge of them. I care nothing really about their life or their TV shows or anything else about them. But a lot of people in America do. And because of your interest in them or people's interest in them, that just makes them richer. It makes them more famous. It serves their purpose. Does it serve yours? I guess is the question. Think about how you're spending your time. Are you using it to further your goals, to make yourself happier? Or are you just saying, I don't have what it takes to get what I want, so I guess I'm just not going to get what I want? and having a loser's attitude and a defeatist attitude. The truth of the matter is that none of us has everything that we want. And we're all in different positions in life. So what one person has, maybe the other person has it, or maybe they don't. You could have all the money in the world and not have any love in your life. Or you could have all the love in your life and no money, no resources, no power. Who's better off? I don't know. But for me, I think it's a very personal decision, and it's a personal view that you need to come up with on your own to say what you want out of life. And if you want something bad enough, look at the resources available to you to help you get there. That's really the root and core of working with what you have.
Well, John, you hear a lot of these stories with entrepreneurs. One of the most popular that I can think of is off the top of my head is Richard Branson from Virgin Airlines, and he had started his record label, and he already had a little record label, I think, when he started Virgin Airlines. And from what I understand, is he was going down to the Virgin Islands to see a girl, and for whatever reason, his plane got delayed and he couldn't catch a flight. He was flying standby or something. And he said there was a bunch of 10 other people that are waiting, to fly standby, and there's not going to be any planes until the next day. And he saw a small charter jet, and he was like, well, if we have enough people, we could charter that jet. And he made a little sign that said Virgin Airlines. And he went and got those people together and got them to all contribute in. And that was his first official entry into Virgin Airlines. He knew nothing about that business, and he dominated. But he used his ingenuity and the limited resources he had, which was a marker and a piece of cardboard, and started one of the biggest companies in the world.
Yeah, it's funny. That reminds me of a story my dad told me when my dad did not finish college. He did not graduate from college, but he did go to a college for, I think, a few semesters. And he said that when he was away at college, he needed to go home, or was planning to go home on break, but he didn't have a car to get home. He didn't have friends who had a car. He didn't have that resource available to him. So we put up a little 3x5 note card up on the bulletin board that said, wherever he was, to Springfield, Illinois, which was where he was going. It will cost you this much money. And what he did is he gathered a list of other students he wanted to come home, wanted to ride home, and collected money in advance from them, and then he bought a cheap car.
Little do you know that your father created Uber.
Yeah, he bought a cheap car, and maybe $200 car or something like that, piece of junk car, and drove, bought the car and drove the people home. And then I think, I guess he sold the car later on, that to me is being resourceful. Back when I was in college, I lived off campus, and I rented a house just in my name only. It was a 3-bedroom house, and it had a huge Florida room in the back. So what I did is I kind of closed off the Florida room. It was already pretty much closed off, but I made it more private, put up curtains, and I lived in the back. And then I rented out the 3 other rooms, and that paid my rent for several years. I had a turnover every time I had someone leave. I had to replace them, get another roommate. But I basically was supporting myself. I didn't have enough money to live really in that neighborhood, so I just used my ingenuity. I used my resources. I placed ads, and I got roommates. It was pretty easy, and I basically lived rent free for about 2.5 years. That's thinking your way through the problem. It's somewhat kind of related to the life happens story. When you're trying to meet some goals, life always throws different challenges at you, and you have to think about these challenges in a different way than you've been able to think about them in the past. In my situation, things were happening whereas I couldn't just throw money at them to solve my problems. I couldn't get a new refrigerator. I couldn't get a new microwave. But I learned, I looked for loopholes. I looked for other ways to get the job done. And in my case, it was basically it was more of a learning experience more than anything. Didn't cost me a lot of money to fix those problems once I had an understanding of what the problem was and learned on my own how to fix it.
John, sometimes it can be a blessing in disguise to have limited resources because, as I was talking about before with Ernesto, these guys had to use their ingenuity, but it helped them get through life for everything. And this happens in everything. Sometimes if you think of you're building a project at your house and you got to have all the proper tools, and then you're going to Home Depot and you're buying saws and hammers and all these supplies, and you think you got to have the latest and greatest in order to build what you want. And then you see some guy that has like a hammer and he can build exactly what you have using limited resources because he's got so in depth with how he's mastered that hammer because it's the only tool he has. You know what I'm saying? It happens. It can kind of be a blessing where you can be overwhelmed. I know that when you're starting out, say you're starting a business and you're trying to collect as many tools as possible, it can become overwhelming trying to figure out how to use all those compared to if you master one or two things or principles that will help you better. Case in point, working out, which I know we relate a lot of stuff to working out, but it's such a great, model for a good functioning life. I used to do this where I thought I had to have a bench, weights, a lat pull down machine, a squat rack, and you need all these tools to get in shape. And you spend more time organizing all your weights and your benches and make sure they're clean and setting up your area where you should be spending that time just exercising. And there's so much you can do without any weights or one barbell, or I came home today, and I didn't have time to do a long extended workout. So I just took the barbell and I said, you know what, I'm going to do some presses and I'm going to do some bench press. And it hit the areas I needed to do. And it probably was more beneficial because I didn't deplete myself with a small bunch of useless exercises. I hit the big basic exercises I needed to get the job done and hit it harder than I probably would because I had limited time. And it's the same thing with limited resources. Sometimes you can focus that into the one thing that really gets the biggest percentage of work done for you rather than spreading it all over different small little tasks.
Yeah, I think we can get it in our own heads, what we need or what we don't need. We create our own expectations around any number of different situations. Those expectations can really be harmful if you think about them. Because if you don't have the resources to meet your expectations, you feel like you can't do it. And that's just so far from the truth. If you try to keep your expectations low, then I think you can surprise yourself with your creativity and how to get from point A to point B, in your own way.
John, I remember, I like doing videography on the side and,
Right.
I like cameras and that kind of stuff. And I remember hearing a story of this really popular wedding videographer. And everyone was like, what's this guy use to edit? Because his movies are so phenomenal. And what kind of gear does he shoot on? And that's an industry where at a time it used to be like you had to have the bigger, better camera to kind of be impressive to make you feel like you could charge kind of money that you wanted to charge. Well, it turns out this guy had like a little handy cam like a real cheap one, and edited on some $79, let's edit movie editing software that was like not even up to standard of what comes free packaged on your Mac, or just maybe just a little bit better than the Windows version of Movie Maker. So this guy just used his creativity and knew his art, so he was able to create these fantastic movies, really productions, with very limited resources.
Yeah, that's we are so resource focused, aren't we? We always feel like we have to have the best, but sometimes you don't need the best. And when you're facing limited resources, you have to make decisions on where to put your money. And I'll tell you, digging myself out of a huge financial hole, that was the key, really, to getting out of that hole, was making the right choices, changing my lifestyle, and recognizing that when I go into a grocery store, I used to pick the name brand foods, especially the ones that I grew up with. I knew I liked, and I just went with the name brand. I went with what I knew. But when I didn't have the money to buy those name brands, I had some very difficult choices to make. And I tried a number of different, off-brand products and store brand products. And what I realized at that time was that if I can't taste the difference or feel the difference or see the difference, why would I spend the extra money to get that? It's a utilitarian type of problem that we have. Look at the utility, look at the use that you're getting out of that product, that service, or whatever it is. What kind of use are you getting out of it, and what kind of value do you attach to that?
Right, because in that kind of situation, you have to be able to look past the years of branding that has been imposed on you.
Yes.
And the feelings of, like, when you think of certain sodas, of how that made you feel because those commercials told you had to feel a certain way, or the people that, like when I quit Diet Coke, one of the things that pissed me off and made me, say, you know what, this is crap. I'm giving this up, is some billboard, and it said something like Diet Coke be, exceptional. And
yeah,
it has nothing to do with that. If it said taste great, yeah, that's okay. But when they're trying to make it look like it's just a lifestyle and that this drink is going to, make you an exceptional person, I thought it just rang so corporate to me, and I was just so sickened by it. And I was like, you know what? It's like the nail in the coffin. But John, is this also? I think if you target the resources that you do have for maximum impact, and you could think of this when one of the greatest stories, which I couldn't believe you had never truly watched, which you told me a little while ago, was Star Wars. One of our generation's, mythos.
Oh no!
And
not this again.
The rebels had no way to go up against the Empire, which was this massive, machine of stormtroopers and the Death Star. And how did they beat them? They targeted one little small area on the Death Star to blow up, and they sent their ragtag team of rebels in there. Of course, it's the little guy versus the big guy, and everyone loves that kind of story. But it's true. That's leveraging what resources you do have and using them for maximum impact. And John told me a couple months ago, he's like, yeah, I'm going to watch Star Wars with my kids. I never really watched it. And I was like, what? How could you never really watch Star Wars?
You were there with me when I saw Star Wars for the first time. I'm just not an avid fan like you are that, knows every line of the movie and every scene and can apply it to my life. I just,
I'm very low on the totem pole when it comes to fans and stuff like that for Star Wars, but I think it was a great movie, and I think it was a great hero's journey, example of the hero's journey, but yeah,
Yeah.
I was bewildered when you told me you had, that's,
Come on now.
I
We know you have a lightsaber in your closet still.
no, I don't, but my son does, so I can
And
always play with his.
I'm sure the Princess Leia, outfit comes out every now and then. Well, wait a minute, that's another subject. But no, it's we have going back to the brand issue, and of course Star Wars is a huge brand, but we come to identify with these brands and they do become a part of us. So, if we're not able to wear a certain label on our clothes, if we can't eat a certain type of food, a certain branding of food, or live in a certain type of house or drive a certain type of car, it really can affect you at a very personal level because we identify with the status or the prestige or whatever goes along with that particular brand. Uh, when we have to make changes in our life to whereas we can't afford that brand anymore, we can't drive that luxury car that we used to drive, or we can't wear the label of clothes that we used to wear. We have to make changes. We have to change the way we eat because of finances, or because of, it doesn't have to be because of finances, but it could be on any number of other reasons. When we have to make changes in our life, that hits us at a very personal level. And it can be very humbling, I think, going through that, having gone through that myself. And it's really easy to start feeling down about yourself. But let me say, there's no reason to feel bad about yourself because of changes that you have to make, especially if you're making them for the right reasons, that you're going for a certain goal and you have to make sacrifices, you have to make decisions, and you're living with those decisions. I see nothing wrong with that. In fact, I commend you for doing that, for looking beyond the branding, looking beyond the labels, and moving towards what you really want out of life, looking at the big picture rather than the small little place that you're trying to hit on the Death Star. Come on.
Okay, I'll throw another big movie reference from the 70s at you. Rocky. Well, actually, we'll move into the 80s because it was probably Rocky 4 when he fought the Russian, right? When they showed Rocky kind of go back to his roots and start almost doing like CrossFit. Before CrossFit was around, he was taking, chopping wood and running through the snow and flipping tires and doing pull-ups on wood rafters and stuff like that. Meanwhile, the Russian guy was played by Dolph Lundgren, had like steroids being pumped into him, had doctors monitoring him while he ran the treadmill and lifted weights, and it just it showed that opposition. Here's Rocky chasing chickens around to get his speed, and this guy had the highest tech stuff, but because Rocky was supposed to be pure because it wasn't artificial, he eventually prevailed. Yeah, he earned.
Rocky is a great example of life change, isn't it? Because what it taught us, especially Rocky 1, is that the underdog doesn't always win. Sometimes they get the hell beat out of them.
But he went the distance. He tried.
But he went the distance. Yeah, you're right. And yes, you're going to win. You're going to have you should want to try to win, I guess. But also it's more than just winning or losing. It's the fight that you put up, and it's what you go for that matters. It's in working with what you got. Look at Rocky as an example. Not using the fancy equipment, using what's around in his environment. Jackie Chan is really known for that, isn't he? In the films, he's not. He was one of the first ones. Correct me if I'm wrong. I probably am wrong, but he used props from his environment in his fight scenes.
Oh yeah, yeah. He would fight with jugs and benches, and
Yeah, and
if he was
I
cooking,
think
if he was
that's-
cooking dinner, he'd fight with pots and pans. Absolutely.
And I think that's the key here. The key point that we're trying to get across is that we all have some type of resources available to us in one way or another. They're not they're not equal. Life, the battles that we have to fight, we all don't share the same tools, but we have to use what we have. There's a story back when I used to work for the Veterans Administration Hospital a long time ago. I remember one of the first meetings I attended. Actually, it was my first day on the job there. I was in this meeting, whereas all the regional directors were coming in, from all these different states, all these various medical centers were gathering for an annual meeting, and I was charged with taking notes. And all morning, I was sitting there listening to these men and women talk about their organization, talk about their hospital, talk about what they're doing. And I tell you, I was starstruck. I was in awe of the power and knowledge of these people. And then we had a break, and this brings us full circle back to the bathroom break. I guess I've learned a lot about myself in the bathroom.
I bet you have.
But we won't go into details there. But so we're taking a bathroom break, and all the guys are lined up at the stall, and lined up against the wall, and I'm thinking, you know what? These guys are just like me. They're talking about their families. They're talking about things that are important to them in life, their hobbies, and it just kind of dawned on me that these guys in the men's room talking about their careers had been going at it a long time. They had been in the business for a long time. They had a lot of experience under their belt. They had time to gather resources, to build their resources, to build their power base, to build their knowledge. Here I was just starting out with a formal education under my belt. I was decades behind them. But at the end, it all balances out. I just had not had that chance to get there at that point. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's just the way life is. And if we're, the world is so competitive, and we're always trying to compete. It seems like, compete with our next door neighbor because maybe they got a new car or moving to a new house. They have something better than you do. But you don't have to run that race if you don't choose to go that way. My suggestion is that if you're going to compete with anyone, compete with yourself. Do better than you have done before. And use yourself as a marker or a judgment, something to judge against. If you want to compete, work at bettering yourself. Work with what you have and use what you have at your disposal. And I think you'll see life start to change and to get better, because you won't be trying to compete for things that you don't have and trying to spend your energy trying to get those labels or those brands. You don't really need them. So use what you have at your disposal and make it work for you.
Be Rocky, my friend. Chase chickens. I have a quote, John. I always like to throw a quote in, and this is by someone that I doubt anyone of them knows. His name's Craig Rochelle, but it's a great quote about resources. Limited resources are not a hindrance to innovation. Limited resources are a catalyst for innovation. And that's so true. You know, as we were talking about before, when you have so little, or to my friends that were from Cuba, you know, they didn't have the luxuries that we had. They didn't have, you know, just the basic needs sometimes, and they had to come up with ideas of how they were going to get it and how they were going to do it. And sometimes they became so creative that they would astonish you to the things that they create. You're like, my God, I wouldn't even imagine that, you know. But when you don't have nothing or come from nothing, you really do find a way.
Yep. And that's the lesson here today. To use that last piece of toilet paper that you have to help you get the job done, because that's all you have.
I think that's a good.
Or you get really nasty fingernails, which is pretty gross.
Yeah, my dad's method. That's not advisable. Well, John, I think that's about sums up our episode, right?
Yep, I think so. Until the next time, this is Tom with the Swift Kick in the Ass. Make sure that you check out our website. Check us out on Facebook, Twitter. We'd love to hear from you. Sign up on our website for our vault. And
like us on Facebook and Twitter. Our Twitter's blowing up right now, so check us out. We've been posting some really good stuff, and a lot of people are following us, and I like that. That's good. So keep it up. And this is Tom. Peace.
And this is John. Peace. Talk to you later.